CPR, which is Center for Public Policy Research, is a leading Indian think tank, and energy security and other related areas are one of the many verticals we handle. The key motivation behind this series is kind of an engaging dialogue over the visibly pushing issues of the energy market. We can see so many issues around this market, going up and down in different segments and different verticals. Before I get into too much details of the talk today, I would like to reiterate, which I had been doing in the last three dialogues, that our focus is not on environmental aspects. Our deliberations will be around a very balanced blend of business, geopolitics, global economics, and the national policies. And today we have taken a very interesting topic, which is the role of electric vehicles in India's energy secure future. We all know it's going to play a major role. While it's very, very interesting and fascinating to see the way it is rolling out, it has got its own equally difficult challenges as well. And when we try to understand it, we will also endeavor to map it out to the global scenarios as well. We need to see where we stand compared to the developing and underdevelopment world and the countries are moving. To deliberate on this, we have three carefully chosen, very renowned panelists with us today, each of them with enviably outstanding profiles in the respective domains. While we have two of them with an international background, and our third panelist is a bureaucrat turned expert in this area. I personally believe, and CPPR team together believe, this blend will help us to have a very clear global perspective and well-navigated mapping of that perspective into our Indian scenario. Start with, we have Mr. Mike Lynch, the President of Strategic Energy and Economic Research in the Energy Policy Research Institute in Massachusetts, USA. Then we have Mr. Anush Srivastava, an ex-bureaucrat with Niti Aayog, and currently a visiting professor of practice in the Department of Sustainable Energy Engineering in Indian Institute of Technology, IIT Kanpur. And we have Mr. Talat Munshi, a very senior advisor at the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, at their Copenhagen Climate Center, an international expert with an Indian origin. We brought him in explicitly because he can connect the international perspective to Indian scenario, specifically comparing with other similar developing countries where UNEP is working and where his inputs are specifically in. I think the audience would agree with us. We can't ask for anything better. We have got a beautiful list of panelists with enviable profiles. Thank you so very much, panelists. Thank you so very much from the entire CPPR family. Now, coming to today's topic, we all know at Glasgow in COP26, India pledged to cut its total projected carbon emission by 1 billion tons by 2030. 1 billion by 2030 is a big number. And reduce the carbon intensity of the nation's economy by less than 45% by the end of this decade, that is 2030. And the net zero realization by 2070. These are really, really ambitious targets, to say the least. In line with these commitments, the government of India has put forth many decisions and action plans with high focus on increasing India's electric mobility, keeping that this market is at a rapid growth rate in line with the urbanization and the population growth in the country. The transport sector accounts for almost 11% of total CO2 emissions per different studies, especially the ones conducted by Niti Aayog and its associates. Now, if it is 11% of the total CO2, now you can start connecting the numbers. To fulfill the 2070 goal committed at COP26 in Glasgow, one of the key requirements is, as a country, we need to develop our transport sector sustainably by increasing the share of non-fossil fuel based on the vehicles, non-fossil fuel based vehicles, including the electric vehicles, not only electric vehicles, any non-fossil fuel based vehicles. And to connect it to a global perspective, in any country, the urban cities are the forefront when it comes to the percentage use of transport system. We know that. If I connect to some statistics from the UN studies, India's urban population is projected to stand at 675 million by 2035, just 12 years from now, second only to China's 1 billion. It's a huge number. Now, looking at the electric vehicle landscape in India, in 2020, our market stood at about 220 million, if I remember correctly, the US dollars. And the growth which was projected for this decade, that is 2021 to 2030, was a rate of 94.4%. If you connect that compounded 94.4% from $220 million of 2020, it reaches to 152 billion US dollars by 2020. This is beyond the definition of huge for a market for EVs. It's an interesting number, challenging target, but it requires focus on an array of options to come together when discussing the transport sector and the energy. When we get overly excited about all these things, we also need to look at the shortcomings of the electric mobility sector. Now, we are trying to touch some of the key areas in the sector, the advantages, where we should be and how we should be marching to, and the challenges around. So this is what we are trying to cover in this episode. We'll basically do a pretty deep dive into many areas and leverage national as well as global learnings with respect to electric mobility sector. We will touch the hits and the misses incurred in other nations, because end of the day, we need to learn from the other country. No country can afford to learn from only its own experiences and mistakes. The technical know-how that might help us to overhaul the transport sector and make it as green as possible, emission-wise. So basically, we will touch three key verticals. First is EV a short roadmap to reducing the emissions in India? That's the first thing we will touch. The second one will be the structural and infrastructural problems when we try to incorporate EV into private and commercial vehicular sector, because you need to segregate into two compartments, the private vehicles and the commercial vehicle. And finally, we will also touch the international practices that can be customized and adopted to our country. Some of the international practices can be practically copied just like that to our country or any country, but some will have to be customized. Now, this customization can be done to something which is successfully practiced in a developing or developed or even underdeveloped countries. So now, we will not be touching these three areas in a specific sequence, but the questions we will be asking to our experts and the expert opinion they will be sharing will be predominantly touching these three areas. That is how we wanted to connect the balanced time of this event into the topic we are going to touch. Now, let me introduce our speakers in a bit detail. Let me start with Mike. Mike, as I said, is the president of Strategic Energy and Economic Research, a Massachusetts-based consultancy, and he's also a distinguished fellow with a Washington-based Energy Policy Research Foundation. After his education in the prestigious Massachusetts Institute of Technology, popularly known as MIT, in his political science department in 1979, and he held numerous research positions at MIT, and subsequently he was the chief energy economist at DREWIFA, And he also served as the president of the US Association for the Energy Economics. He's a very senior contributor at Forbes.com, and his publications have appeared in several languages around the world. He also published a book titled The Peak Oil Scare and the Coming Oil Flood in 2016. Welcome, Mike. Our next panelist is Mr. Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome. And next panelist is Mr. Anil Srivastava, who is currently the visiting professor of practice at the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur. He brings a totally different profile. Anil has been a long-term bureaucrat with extensive experience in the civil aviation, electric vehicles, storage battery, transformative mobility, public service, program implementation, policy formulation, corporate management, and global negotiations. Most recently, he was principal advisor and director general in the Niti Aayog. When we scan his last 8 years of engagements, it predominantly includes 3 years leading the transformative mobility and battery storage initiative, India's transition into electric vehicles, resulting in a major policy decision by the ministries, departments, and state government. He also had leadership positions in all areas of civil aviation in the Government of India, including 3 years as the chairman and managing director of Pawan Hans Helicopters Limited. He had also prepared an output and outcome-based monitoring and evaluation framework for the Government of India's annual budgets. Welcome, Anil. Our third expert is Mr. Talat Munshi, who is a senior advisor at the United Nations Environmental Program at the Climate Center of UNEP in Copenhagen in Denmark. His work and the research in the climate change and cities in developing countries, particularly analyzing the role of land use, transport, and geoinformation science in the mitigation and adaptation. Prior to this, he also had worked as an associate professor in the Faculty of Planning, the CPT University in India, and a lecturer in the transport at the Faculty of ITC in the University of Trent in the Netherlands. And he also was associate at the Energy and Resource Institute of India, which is popularly known as TERRA. He has extensive experience in research and consulting work with countries in Africa, Asia, and Europe continents, specifically on topics related to urban planning, transport, and climate finance. He also has a significant number of publications to his credits on various subjects. Talat is an engineer by training from the CPT University. He has a PhD from the University of Twente in the Netherlands and master's degrees in environmental planning from CPT University. Topping up all these things, he also holds a master's in urban infrastructure management from the Faculty of ITC in the UT. Welcome, Talat. Now, let me familiarize the way we are going to
thank you so much.
compartmentalize. Thank you. Let me now compartmentalize the balance of the discussion. We will have basically 2 sections for this dialogue. The first will have, again, 2 components. One, I will be asking some very generic questions to our eminent panelists, 1 to each panelist. And then we will also ask 2 specific questions to these panelists based on their areas of expertise. And after that, we will be getting the opportunity to listen to each of the panelists based on their research and interests and engagements, probably 5 to 7 minutes expert opinions about various aspects related to the topic. At the end, in the third compartment, I'll be concluding all the discussions through 1 or 2 additional questions, and the floor will be open for questions from the audience. we strongly encourage the audience to post their questions on the chat box. And my colleagues, the experts at CPPR research team, will be going over the questions and compiling some of the questions, or because obviously we have shortage of time, we'll be picking some of the questions which are most relevant and not repetitive to what is discussed here and ask the experts. Now, let us get to the first session. As I said, we will have some very generic questions to each of the panelists. Let me start with Anil. Anil, are you there? Hello, Anil. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm very much there.
Good, good. Anil, now, as I touched in my introduction, the electric vehicle market size in India, it was 220 million USD in 2020. And the commercial vehicle segment accounted for almost 57% of it. In 2020, it was predicted for a compounded growth of 94.4%, which would take it to 152 billion US dollars by 2030. Now, coming to the questions, I would like to put it into three small sections, but you can answer in whichever way or clubbed way. What do you think are the contributing factors to the rise in demand for the electric vehicles across the country? And what are the factors impacting the demand side for the customers? When we look at it, it's very interesting to see this growth, but it also comes with its associated challenges. So we would like to hear a bit about the challenges and the consumer side of it. And what role do you see the private sector would be playing in the growth of electric vehicles in India? And we always want to hear from you, being an ex-bureaucrat, how can the public-private partnership be leveraged to further bolster this growth? And the last part of the question, I would say, how can the private players make the transport industry greener overall? The private sector have to be more profit-oriented, whereas the public sector can afford a bit more social aspect of it. If you can please share your thoughts on that.
You have clubbed a lot of things in this question, I believe. Yeah, but when we started this narrative from the Niti Aayog side in 2017 and around, that time, just a minute, sorry. I'm very sorry. So when we started this narrative from the Niti Aayog, from the government of India, and on the electric vehicle, and at that time, the government started with a lot of proactive policies from the demand side as well as from the consumer side. We always had it in our mind that to take it forward and really to take it in a very positive way, all the stakeholders have to be on board. And the stakeholders comprised of not only the consumer, which is the end beneficiary, but the industry and the think tanks and the R&D research institutes, and then the unorganized sector which is involved with that. So taking into all those things in account, the government had its priorities very clear. Now the projected figure which you said is about the revenue turnover which the electric vehicle is going to have is something which is, to my understanding, is on the lower side. Probably the achievement in the real term will be more than that, for the simple reason that now that the customer has started realizing the cost of ownership of an electric vehicle, that is something which is happening. The end consumer and the industry is also playing a very positive role. For the first time, probably the industry realized that the government is moving faster or probably more proactive than the industry. And the industry had to keep pace with the policies. The government came out with about 20 to 25 different policies, whether they were related with the whether those policies were related with the power tariff, whether they were related with the green number plates or the road transport ministry or the Department of Science and Technology, Department of Heavy Industries, or whether they were related with the setting the standards for the vehicle, setting standards for the batteries. So all those policies, around 20-25 policies came forward to take it forward, and the industry also realized that now here is the government, which means business. And these instructions came from the Indian government, from the topmost leadership. And that is how the industry also got mobilized. I do very clearly remember that there are startups and the companies which are starting in the private sector, and there are companies which are well set up in the industry. They are very well established in the two-wheeler segment or the four-wheeler segment. And it was the push from the startups and the industry partners who were starting in the electric vehicle segment that the things started moving on. So industry has taken it forward very well, and with the support of the government, and the figures which we have given regarding the achievements about the turnover or the in terms of the number of electric vehicles, I think we will be moving more than that. Now, coming to your question regarding the private sector participation and the public sector participation. So now the government has played its role while framing the policies and encouraging and developing the ecosystem for the adoption of electric vehicles. And that is the reason that is the simple reason that it is being promoted. It is being growing the way probably we are looking forward maybe 5 or 6 years back. Now there are some aspects of it. There are in fact, as you look at it, the electric vehicle, the electric vehicle as such is an age-old technology, whether it's electric motor, powertrain, or even the battery management system is nothing but very simple kind of a software. So likewise. But the only thing which is lacking in our country is the advanced cell chemistries, and that the government realized, and the government came out with the production-linked incentive scheme for the advanced cell chemistries. So that way you look at it, and it is for the industry now to go forward and have about 60 to 65% of the components which can be manufactured indigenously, and industry can move forward with that. Now there are incentives for the advanced cell chemistries also, and I'm very sure that in the next 2 to 3 years we will be finding India producing cells to its requirement in terms of the lithium-ion batteries and the cells. So this is probably the entire canvas in which things are developing, and we are taking it forward. I hope I have tried to cover the whole lot of things which you were asking, Madhu. And if there is anything left, please let me know.
No, that was very well narrated, sir. Very, very well narrated. Thank you so very much. Now, let me move to Mike. Mike, I know you will be bringing in more of US perspective, which is the most important aspect of it, but please feel free to connect it with your experience with other countries, be it India or other countries. There was a recently published study in the Nature magazine where we found the EV could lead to more emissions than those with the conventional engines. Very interesting study. And depending on where and how the EVs are being charged. And on the other hand, the study also tells that the gasoline electric hybrid, the hybrid vehicles, could reduce the CO2 emissions by average 30% compared to the average gasoline four-wheel vehicles. Now, if you connect these things, and in fact, in addition to this, hybrid vehicles do not require a costly charging infrastructure because the battery is self-charged by the gasoline-powered engine. Of course, it's consuming gasoline for charging the battery as well, but the infrastructure doesn't have to be. Now, when you connect these things, could a mosaic approach to the transportation sector, can it further aid the energy transition goals? I believe we need to consider a combination of electric vehicles, especially when it comes to two-wheeler segment, and blend it with an emphasis upon gasoline electric hybrids for four-wheel cars. So how do you see this thing?
Yeah, I agree very much, Madhu. I'm reminded of the old Soviet days where they said, the government had decided that there was one type of pencil and everybody should use exactly that pencil. It's very hard to find one solution that fits every situation. And you are right. The manufacture of lithium ion batteries requires a lot of energy. People don't always realize that. It's very energy intensive. Plus, the battery packs are very heavy. So, whereas a gasoline tank in a car may weigh a few pounds, a battery pack will be 400 or 500 kilograms easily. And especially, I hate to say this, people in this country want to buy electric Hummers, which is sort of, it's almost a tank. And you really lose all the greenhouse gas savings by doing that. So if you're in Norway, where all the electricity is hydro, or France, where it's almost all nuclear, you get a significant savings in greenhouse gas emissions. But you're probably still buying a lot of the components of the car, especially the battery components, from China, which, as we all know, still uses about, I think, 85% coal in its power sector. So essentially, the problem is people tend to refer to electric vehicles as zero emission vehicles, and they're not. I mean, nothing is zero emissions. We joke sometimes they're remote emission vehicles. But you can get a saving in the best situation of 50-60% of greenhouse gas emissions. And as you mentioned, a gas hybrid electric will get you about 30% without having problems of range anxiety, which in a lot of places around the world, that's very important. So electric vehicles work great in fleets and in cities. Not so much in suburban areas like the US, certainly, but a lot of other parts of the world. I'll also mention plug-in hybrids. You don't need the infrastructure because you can charge at home, still use a gasoline engine as needed, but get a certain amount of your power from electricity. And the big difference is cost. A gas hybrid costs slightly more than a regular car. A plug-in hybrid, maybe $2,000, $3,000 more, and a battery electric vehicle is $8,000 to $12,000 more. So you're really not getting the most cost-effective solution with battery electric vehicles.
Very nicely put, because see, when you look at it from an individual customer's point of view, he or she has to look at his own pocket much before he looks at the carbon emission and the global or the national level statistics. So, but as you rightly said, the cost of these vehicles across the three different categories, the gasoline, the hybrid, and the electric, is still the key driver in many countries. But hopefully, going over the years, the technologies are expected to advance, and we should be seeing more and more innovative ideas, which would be kind of balancing this cost disparity to some extent. Now, let me move to Talat. Talat, the most of the passenger activity, you being an international person with Indian origin, I have some specific questions with you, which we would get really enriching, experiences from you to connect probably the first 30, 40 years of you in India to the international experience you have in the next decades, a couple of decades you have. Now, most of the passenger activity in India is in two-wheeler and four-wheelers, which showcases a very high dependence on the personal vehicles. And when you look at the heavy-duty trucks and the cars, they contribute almost 60% of the total road transport CO2 emission on an average. And this is only expected to continue rising if we do not address it correctly. Now, how can we look to shift the dependency from private EVs to public EVs, like the buses? There are some parts of India which effectively use the public EV system for transportation, and there are other parts of the world which use this thing for reducing the passenger vehicles dependency on the road, and that in turn will reduce the overall emissions. I'm mindful about the point that we also need to consider the efficient electrification of the HDTs. Basically, the objective is to collectively reduce the emissions by the road transport, not just in one segment, but overall emissions by the road transport. Can you throw some light on that? Hi, Talat.
Yeah, okay. So I was just waiting to get myself unmuted.
Sure.
Basically, I think you correctly said that a large part of emissions are coming from heavy duty vehicles and cars on roads. But there are other facts also that we need to consider, like when we are looking at passenger transport, especially in cities from developing countries and countries like India, for example. Yeah. So large part of mobility still is by walking and by bicycling and also by public transport. So basically, like the first attempts that have to be made in our countries is to hold these people where they are and try not to get them onto motorized modes of transport. And then so that's the first ambition. But when we are also looking at uh, the EV market per se, and when we are looking at uh, the public forms of transport which are there. So we are looking at all shared modes of transport, uh, public transports like buses, and maybe if you go to extreme metros, etc. Also paratransit and also micro mobility options. When we look at what has happened, especially in India, a lot of innovations have happened in the public transport sector. And a lot of EVs have come up, especially like I think there are about 20 cities or even more than 20 cities where they have bought electric buses. So, and that has worked quite well in India. And when we look at what is happening also in other countries and what they want and their ambitions, so the first ambitions are to try to convert public transport system like buses to EVs. And I think that's the most something which is most easily done because that's where the government and collective can play a role, and that's what has been happening in India. And in India, I think what other countries can learn from India is what has happened in the paratransit sector. So there is like been an inorganic growth of electric vehicles in the paratransit sector, but the government has come in later on and has tried to regulate all of it, and that's well and good. So these are the two sectors where things have happened because the key factors that would again drive there is when what we have found out in studies in India also is there is this big anxiety among people about the infrastructure, especially the charging infrastructure, where they're going to charge it, and whether the charge in the vehicle will be enough for them to run the amount of kilometers that they are running and the time that would be required for charging, etc., etc. But so basically when you are running the collective, like for example buses, and also you can have a program and schedules, etc., where the buses can be charged, how they can be done. But for the individuals and with so much poor parking and other regulations in India, and so much contestation of space which happens in urban area, this could be a big challenge as we move forward. So basically, like the biggest options that I see now is to move towards and try to support the collective modes of transport, uh, the paratransit, which is which provides mobility to a large portion of the people, and maybe one segment where we could move forward is also try to look at bicycles, e-bicycles, because traditionally bicycles have been there in India for a very long time. Still about 12 to 15% of mobility in India is by bicycles. So there's a large section, a large market for bicycles in India still. And if you can look at e-bicycles, so that would hold transitions from bicycles to motorized two-wheelers. And again, like as Mike said, it's not like one shoe fits all. So way you look at the battery options for a car, you might have to not want to look at the battery options for two-wheelers in the same esteem. So you might want to look at the battery swapping options, etc., for the two-wheelers, whereas in car you might not want to do it. There are cars which are actively looking at the battery swapping options like Neo. But it is more because the size of the vehicle is less. So depending upon the size of vehicle, etc., we are trying to look at the battery technology options and other mobility options also. And for public transport in the end, what has been happening, like what we have been observing across the world, is that the aim has been to replace the stock, to replace the old diesel buses or diesel with EVs. But like when we talk to experts and when we talk to people, I think the aim has to be to get more people to public transport and try also to increase the amount of stock. So basically try to increase the demand for public transport. So if we are going to increase the demand of public transport, so for example, like if Mauritius is looking to replace 500 buses, they should not be looking to replace 500 buses, but they should be looking at the demand for public transport, how it is going to increase, and also be looking at maybe 1,000 buses in future. So basically, like when the mindset changes from the public authorities, their capacity to attract more people to public transport changes, then a lot of transitional changes will come in the way people move in the cities. Hope I answer your question.
You did, sir. You did very well. And in fact, you connected those two ends very well together. And I also liked your point that encourage the people who are currently walking to walk for the rest of their life. Is it what you were saying? So,
No, but
when
try to hold people and try to get more people to walk. That is also an idea.
right. I was making a light point, but at the same time, what I have noticed in India is, unlike the European countries, cycling in cities and even metros are going to be very, very challenging because of the population density in this country. This is something, just a quick observation I wanted to make, though your point of e-cycle is a beautiful one. Now, the next segment of this thing will be, I'll be requesting each of the panelists to answer two of the specific questions to their areas. And before we move on to that segment, does anyone of you want to bounce upon something which is touched by another panelist? If this is an opportunity, if you can use a minute or so, if like, Mike wants to say something, added to what Anil said or other way, if there is any such interest, you would be welcome to do that. Seems there is nothing specific. So can we go to the specific?
No, may I add something to what Talat has just said?
Yes.
While the demand side subsidy schemes were formulated, that is the same two scheme. If you look at it, the focus was on the two-wheeler, three-wheeler, and the public transport. So he has very rightly said that the effort should be that to shift from the to the public transport system or the shared mobility. That is something which is very much needed, and that was very much in the mind of when we formulated the policies from the supply side, from the demand side subsidies and the FAME scheme that we formulated. And for the four-wheel passenger vehicle, we made it that the subsidy should go to the fleet operators, should not be the individual passenger vehicle operator, because the vehicles in India or the four-wheel passenger vehicle in India is used only 5 to 6%. That is the data that we had in Niti Aayog. So when so much little use, why should we subsidize only 5% usage of a vehicle? Whereas we should provide assistance from the demand side to the people who are going to use it more, and also the shift from the individual transport to the shared mobility should take place.
Very valid point. That's a macroeconomic approach to that. If a segment is using 5% of the utility of a particular vehicle, why you should subsidize it so much? Very good point, and very well connected to what the lad said. Now, if you permit, let us move on to the special questions section. Let me start with Talat because he just finished. So now, Talat, my first question to you is, I would encourage you to limit the answers in 3 to 4 minutes, if you could, please. Keeping in mind one of the case studies you personally and your team had undertaken, It was on the middle income in service residents in Hyderabad, in India. What are some of the key observations and lessons that can be drawn from this case study? If you recollect some of the key aspects which could be connected to a topic. And when examining the challenges that hindered the adoption of electric vehicles, what valuable insights can be gained? Those can influence the policies and strategies, especially when you aim at promoting a sustainable mobility in country, in India or a country like India.
Okay, thank you for the question. I think the study that we did in Hyderabad was in 2017. So that is when electric mobility plans were being made in India, and this also coincided with some work that was happening in Maharashtra. Okay, this was even before that. So the study that we did in Pune was when electric mobility policies were being framed for Maharashtra, etc. So basically, the idea here was to try to do a stated preference, because people were not aware about what is happening in the electric mobility. Some cars were running at that time, but they were quite primitive. So to try to tell them that, okay, if this thing happens, would you choose electric mobility or not? So when we went in, we asked them like, okay, would you choose a EV vehicle or would you not choose a EV vehicle? So there was a significant portion of the people who said we will choose EV. So that showed that there was an intention from people to move towards EVs. But moment we gave them the specifications in terms of cost, etc., a large section of those said, no, we would not purchase an EV. After that, what we said that we confronted them with certain policy initiatives. So when we said that, okay, if you buy an EV, you might get free parking in certain places. There would be charging in certain places, and there would be further incentives, maybe preferential lanes, etc. for you. So a large section of the population then shifted to EVs. But so we did for motorized vehicles and cars for both. And then in the end, we said financial incentives. But what we found is that the larger shift happened when we presented them with policy initiatives. And that was also confirmed based on their apprehensions. So there were more apprehensions about the charging infrastructure availability, and also about the apprehensions about range at that moment, because at that moment we were not talking about large battery packs, etc. And so basically there is initial apprehension about the cost. So large section of the people were worried about the cost, but once those people are moved out, so then there was apprehension about infrastructure, and also about other incentives that would come in, basically in terms of charging, etc. But the positive thing was the initial intention to buy the vehicles was quite large in India. And then further up, we did a similar study in Pune. And in Pune, we found out that, where we tried to frame certain policies, like what could be the parking policy that could support EV vehicles in India, where could the chargers come up, what could be the charging policy, etc., etc. So yeah, that's what my response is.
Okay, thank you so very much. Yeah, that's very good. That's very good. Can I touch one more question specific to your area and UNEP? Can we take some specific insights from the Global Electric Mobility Program of UNEP? Because you have got a Global Electric Mobility Program. The key here, I want to look at the support for the low and middle income developing nations. And when we shift from the fossil fuel to electric vehicles, and what are the learnings from the projects UNEP have done at a global platform, and you probably were personally involved in some of the projects. In developing national electric mobility roadmaps across various developing countries. Can you throw some insights around that?
So basically, like we have been involved in a couple of countries from the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center, so which is slightly different than the UNEP's the global EV program. We have worked in Ghana, Zimbabwe, Solomon Islands, and we are also working on certain pilot programs in Kigali, that is in Rwanda. I think if you look at countries which are developing and all, the apprehensions are very similar to the ones where we started in India. The EV infrastructure is not there. There are apprehensions about charging. So basically, recently we have had some discussions in another country, developing country, where large number of taxes or the tax revenue comes from sale of fossil fuels in small island countries. And so for example, like one of the stakeholders started saying that, okay, what happens if we convert from fossil fuels to EVs? What would happen to the share of the revenues that are going to come from the diesel and sale of petrol? So which is a large share of revenue for the country. Second thing, there are a lot of apprehensions about the grid infrastructure itself. India is also facing lots of issues about it, but there are other countries also which are going to face, which are even worse off than India, and there is a lot of apprehension about grid infrastructure, etc. So even like if you're going to implement a 200 bus program, for example, in a country like Ghana, for example, yeah, it would put a lot of load on their grid, and would the grid be good enough to hold so much of extra load? So those apprehensions are there. But what is happening is, again, there's a lot of learnings from what has happened in India for a lot of countries. As I earlier said, things can happen where there is a collective. And so most of these countries, stakeholders then requested us to create roadmaps for EV buses. So we did consultations for where we should move forward, and most of these countries are moving forward towards implementing EV buses. And I assume why they are doing it is that because that is where they are more comfortable setting up the charging infrastructure, and also more confident about the operations, and they feel that they are in control. For private cars, etc., because the private cars are not taxed so much, like for example in Denmark and in Norway and in Sweden. So in Denmark we have about 180% tax on the private car. So comparatively the EV is really very expensive compared to the car. So the owning and operating cost just to recover it's quite high. And the third barrier that we have been finding in, I think it's also partly also still in India, is the financing of vehicles is not happening. So that is also a lot of apprehension within the financial sector on financing these vehicles also, because they are more expensive. And even if, like for example, traditionally car finance is for about 4 to 5 years. So if the cost is double, and if you're financing only for the short period of time, so the cost of ownership really increases quite much. And if you're looking at buses in that sector, for example, if the private players have to come in for buses, for them, if the financing is for 4 to 5 years, the financial outgo per month is quite high. And there are a lot of apprehensions where companies say that, okay, what happens if we have to stop operations for 4 or 5 months, like what happened in COVID? So then there are a lot of risk. So generally, what private players have been saying that, okay, if this moratorium period is much larger, then they would be much comfortable. But my take here is that, okay, things are evolving, things will fall in place, but we need to keep pushing.
Perfect. I think that's very well said. And you touched a very important aspect, the duration of the financing for the vehicle. That's a very important aspect for every developing or even underdeveloped countries. Okay, can we move on to Anil? Anil, as an expert in the field of electric mobility, I think you are more known as an electric mobility expert than a civil servant, I believe. As an expert in this field, who has even served as a mission director of National Mission for Transformative Mobility and the Battery Storage under NITI Aayog. You had mentioned once that India is highly reliant. In fact, in the earlier question also, you touched that thing. India is highly reliant on the imports from China on the raw materials for the manufacturing of batteries. You emphasize the need for the government to incentivize the cell manufacturing within the country, actually providing direct incentives per kilowatt hour. What role does the domestic manufacturing of EV components play in reducing the dependence on imports and reducing the nation's carbon footprint? Of course, after I made this question, you just touched one part in the previous questions about that, about reducing the dependence on the import, and within 2 to 3 years, the investments in this sector is going to be pretty high. What impact will this have on the overall EV segment in India, especially when you touch the lithium-ion batteries? It contribute to significant carbon emissions during the mining and manufacturing. And Mike had touched that thing during the manufacturing. It's a very energy intensive process to manufacture this. It costs a lot of energy to manufacture this. Of course, it stores energy, but the manufacturing cost, most likely it comes from fossil fuels. So, can you also touch on the new markets opening up for alternative battery technologies other than lithium-ion batteries? If you can touch some of these areas.
Well, your question has a linkage with the energy transition, which is taking place in the country. You cannot dissociate it with that. Well, and a lot of action is happening on that. The target is to have 450, around 500 gigawatt by 2030, and we are moving pretty well in that direction. So that is one side of it. Now, as I said earlier, the electric vehicle is not a rocket science. There is nothing in that which is technologically is not there in our country. And I keep repeating it to the industry. Look, except cell chemistries and the technologies involved with that, we have everything with us. Now, when you are talking about 60 to 70% of our electric vehicle, the industry can very well take it forward, and it can even go to the extent of a very large indigenization and the local value addition, vice or as compared to the internal combustion vehicles, in which we never designed, we never developed, and we never manufactured a good vehicle in the country. But this cannot be the scene, and this should not be the scene with the electric vehicles in any case. So the industry has to realize it. Now, number one, the country itself offers huge market, and we are, of course, one of the top 3, top 4 automobile manufacturers in the country. But yes, of course, more than 80% of that is 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers. So in that context, India is different from the other parts of the world. Now, the dependence on the lithium-ion batteries or the advanced cell chemistries for the 2-wheeler, 3-wheeler, the battery size is small. The charging infrastructure, which has been talked here, and the other thing which has been talked, that the EV is more expensive. Now, the thing is that how well are we able to convey it to all the stakeholders that, look, EV is not more expensive. It is the concept of the total cost of ownership, which is to be understood, and that needs to be communicated to the masses and to the people. Now, when you take the concept of the total cost of ownership, then you realize that EV, particularly 2-wheeler, 3-wheeler, we have crossed the tipping point, and the TCO is very, very little, maybe 2 years or 2.5 years. Yes, depending upon the mileage or the kilometers which a vehicle runs. So, and that thing has to be conveyed to the financing institutions also, and they are also realizing it, that the total cost of ownership and everything is in the favor of the electric vehicle. Now, the electric vehicle has, 1/10 of the maintenance cost, 1/10 of the operating cost, and the life expectancy is more. So, in that context, it's a very obvious that one should go for an electric vehicle when one is going for a new vehicle. So, in that context, the financing is also taking place. The only issue is that the OEMs are trying to get cell chemistries which are, the kind of cell chemistries which are easily available in the global market, because they have to import it. Now there is a lot of countries have gone in for the adoption of electric vehicles, and the East European countries, the Scandinavian countries have declared that, and some of the major automobile manufacturers have declared that they will not have any internal combustion vehicles from, say, 2023, 2030 onward, 2035 onward, 2028 onwards, and likewise. So in that context, there is a lot of demand for the batteries, and that is where probably the OEMs or the Indian manufacturers have to take into account. Now, I hope I have covered all the points of your question. For the component manufacturers, again, I would say that they have to, and I'm very sure that they are keeping pace with the changes which are happening in the industry. So they are keeping pace with it. Some of the parts are the common, like the vehicle is a vehicle. Only thing changing is instead of the internal combustion engine, you have a powertrain, you have electric motor. So now with that, I think that the component manufacturers in the country are coping up very well, and they are moving forward, and they are switching over to the requirements of the electric vehicle, and they are very, very smart, and they have already read it, that what is written on the wall. I would say that.
Very, very correct. I think I'm very basically an electrical engineer. I couldn't agree more with your point that the electric vehicle is no rocket science at all. It's much, much simpler than an internal combustion engine. Whether it is manufacturing or maintaining, it's much less number of components, where are very, very simple. And I agree with you. The cell chemistry is what matters, and that is where more researches are happening. I'm pretty sure the coming years are going to bring up more innovative ideas. Now, and thank you, Anil. And can I move to Mike? Mike, numerous studies in past have brought attention to the perceived inefficiencies of the electric vehicles compared to the traditional internal combustion engines, including, there were also concerns brought over the range anxiety, which you have already touched, and insufficient charging infrastructure, and the limited driving range for most of the EVs. Of course, it has changed in the last probably 2 to 3 years. The driving range has substantially increased, especially with the leading brands. And these concerns are still prevalent in United States, I assume, where majority of Americans appear to be resistant to transition to EVs. That is what we at least hear in the media. Can you throw a bit more light about it? How the culture in an average American consumer is slightly changing towards EVs?
Well, I think what you're seeing in the U.S. is that the EV is becoming a bit of a niche market, a growing niche, but it's mostly used apparently as a second car. So people will have one large car that they use for their long distance commuting, carrying things and so forth. And then for smaller errands or a short commute, you'll have a second car. That's pretty traditional. The difference is that the second car was usually smaller and cheaper, and the EV tends to be more expensive instead. It's also that you say the more miles you drive an EV, the more you save in terms of dollars per mile. And people who only drive short miles, they're spreading a higher capital cost over a smaller number of miles. So that hurts the EV's economics. It's interesting because people will say things like, oh, the average person doesn't commute more than 40 miles a day, so they don't need a 300-mile or 500-kilometer range. But that's like saying the average person only cooks, 3 pieces of chicken. They only need a toaster oven instead of a big toaster, instead of a big oven. And, the number of, we own a toaster oven, a microwave, and an oven, and we use the different ones for different things. And the notion that, well, you don't cook a turkey very often, but you do want to be able to cook a turkey. The big thing about the automobile culture in the US, especially where you have big open spaces, is it gives you convenience and flexibility. You can hop in, you can go anywhere you want. You don't have to worry about finding gasoline or running out of gas if you're even slightly careful. With the battery electric vehicles, it's still a problem of you have to plan ahead. If you're just in an urban center like New York, Boston, Tokyo, Mumbai, it's fine because you're probably close to a charging station all the time. But when you get out into away from the city, it's a much bigger problem. And since even a fast charging station only recharges a car at about 1/10 the rate of a gasoline pump, so if you have 4 charging stations instead of 4 gasoline pumps, you can only do 1/10 as many people. So you need a lot more charging stations. And you're getting people now saying, I pull in and I have to wait half an hour just to charge, just to get to the station because they're too crowded. So this is it's very hard to estimate the cost of convenience. People have argued historically that the average person chooses convenience always, but that's not necessarily true. They say, the average Roman's commute on foot 2,000 years ago was the same as the average American's drive, which is about 35 minutes. But in Tokyo, they'll take a train for 2 hours to live in a cheaper neighborhood. So convenience isn't the only thing. There's an MIT group, the Center for Energy and Environmental Policy Research. They have a calculator on their website where you can input the cost of your time, the price of gasoline, how many miles you drive, and it gives you a sense of the competitiveness of the cars. And essentially, they wind up saying that battery electric vehicles for an average driver in the US is not that competitive. I think it is still the question of it's nice as an auxiliary, but it's not a substitute for the main passenger car so much as a complement for people who have more than one car.
That's good. So would you then see a market, a much bigger market for hybrid vehicles? I'm cognizant of the cost involved in that. Would you then consider hybrid vehicles more sellable in the US segment?
I think so. There has been some resistance. It's not a huge market yet, but it is growing. And what you find is it's also more price responsive. That is, gasoline prices go up and people want a more efficient car, and the hybrid gives you that without necessarily reducing the size of the vehicle. So I think Toyota Motor Company has sort of said they prefer hybrids over battery electric vehicles, although they're changing their stance some. But I think when you think of the mineral needs, the energy needs for a full battery electric vehicle, and you think of the cost competitiveness, the cost of reducing emissions, I think governments may start leaning, especially in the US, and countries like the US, start leaning more towards the hybrids instead of the full battery electric vehicles.
Yes, I thought so. Thank you so much, Mike. And now can we move to the next segment of our dialogue, where we would request each of you to talk about 5 to 7 minutes on an area of your interest, not to any question, but directly or indirectly related to the topic. I request if we can limit to 5 to 7 minutes. So probably 5 would be preferred. That would take 15 minutes. And then we have another probably 5 to 10 minutes for questions and answers from the audience. Talat, can I start with you, sir?
Okay, yeah. Now I am unmuted, so I can speak. So yeah, thank you for the lovely discussion, and I think it's quite interesting. But as you know, I come from the urban planning side of the academics, and maybe I could give, I thought, an urban angle to sustainable mobility and how electric vehicles would fit into that. As you know, like if we, it's a chicken and egg sort of situation, something that we all know, like transportation systems and the way cities are, they influence each other. So way cities develop puts a demand on the transportation system, and way the transportation system grows in influences the way cities are. So I think some city planners have been very proactive, and they have like planned transportation system, like for example in Copenhagen, in such a way that the urban areas would and how they develop get influenced by it and how they use it. And in India, I think recently, for years, what has been happening in India is we have like not been able to adapt to the changing scenario, and we were still planning cities based on way British would have been doing. So with low FAR and allowing the cities to sprawl, and which had with cars and people being able to move freely, allowed cities to sprawl quite a lot. And also but there was also a problem of some people not being able to travel so fast, so leading to high dense areas and certain low dense areas in city and disproportionate cities. But now with cities aiming towards becoming net zero cities and push towards the net zero, what can happen within cities? And certain policies in India and as well have gone in the right direction, where we have started looking at transit-oriented zones and transit-oriented zones being developed in such a way that the development is oriented towards use of transit. And as we have been speaking here, like a lot of development across the world and even in India has been to convert transit into EVs. And that is an easier thing to do because it's a collective. You could have collective charging, and then the EVs can use it in a proper way. But what needs to happen is to have densities and mix around these areas, and to have last mile connectivity to this transit system in such a way that more people can reach, and that is where micro mobility options can come in. And a lot of cities in Europe, some of it is what I don't like this e-scooters and all, which have been like quite unsafe. But if done in a proper way, micro mobility options can increase the access and the egress to public transport and the reach to people. So then you start getting a network of modes which are running on green fuels, not necessarily electric, ideally electric, but it could not necessarily be electric. And with so much transition happening across the world, where people are committing towards renewable energy, so the energy that is coming is also green. The modes that are using are electric, or maybe like in future maybe hydrogen, I don't know. And what sometimes is also done in another big transition that has happened is in the IT or the information related systems. So there are apps like the MAS apps which allow integrated movement of people. So you could plan your mobility and do a lot of things. So which has changed things quite a lot. And one more thing that we need to look at when we are looking at net zero cities for future is how millennials are going to behave and people who are going to come in future are going to behave. And there has been a large behavioral change which has happened, and things will have to be adapted to the needs of the millennials and etc. And what I have observed is millennials behave very differently in different countries. For example, if you're looking at millennials in India, their aspirations are quite different than millennials in Europe. In Europe, for example, they want to live very close to the city center, want to use public transport and bicycles. But in India, the aspirations are to have motorbikes and to have cars, and also to live a little bit outside the city. So things are quite different, and these cities will have to understand this behavior and try to look at what sustainable options are available vis-a-vis those behaviors if they have to move towards the net zero transport transitions within the cities. I hope I'm within the time. Yeah, that's what I want to
Yeah,
speak.
you are within the time, and more importantly, your points were very, very valuable. Very well connected, because urban mobility is a very interesting area. You have blended your expertise and researches and academic experience in that field to the topic. Fantastic. Very well done. And can I now move to Mike? Mike, can you take your 5 to 7 minutes and take us through some of your interests and areas and details from your experience?
Okay, thank you, Madhu. I'm going to be a little more general. I've been doing this for almost 46 years now. And I have repeatedly seen the expert consensus prove to be wrong. The consensus now is that there's an imminent domination of electric vehicles, and I'm not convinced. Einstein once said, everybody's stupid about something, and frankly, a lot of people are stupid about energy. Groups like the CPPR serve a very valuable function because they bring together expertise and knowledge, but a lot of the public discourse is dominated by people who have only a very passing familiarity with a subject, and they think if they've Googled something and found a website or a quote that agrees with them, then they've done research. And I'll just give you an example. Let's see if I can share my screen here. No, that's the wrong one. Sorry. Here we go. This is from a meeting in the early 1980s at Stanford, the computer models of the world oil market. And they all said, well, the price of oil just tripled from the Iranian Revolution, but it's going to keep going up. And by 2000, the average price forecast turned out to be 6 times what the actual price was. And that was just a really broad consensus. And it's kind of hard to understand how people came to think that. I'm having trouble getting back into my Zoom call. Stop screen sharing. There we go. So the thing is, these are very complex issues, questions of government policy, environmental policy, urban policy, and so forth. And there's too many people who think that there's as you referenced earlier, Madhu, a one size fits all. So, Henry Ford said people can have whatever color car they want as long as it's black. That didn't work out so good. General Motors took his market share. So people are now saying, you can have anything you want as long as it's electric. I suspect we're going to see some pullback on that. And a lot of money will be lost by people investing in mines, but also the auto manufacturers who have suffered repeatedly in the past, being told, everybody wants efficient cars, and then the gasoline price goes down and everybody buys sport utility vehicles. So the thing is, you have to think critically about what you hear and try to understand, I could be completely full of nonsense. You don't know. I don't think anybody on this knows me personally. You can look and you can find a lot of people who think I'm an idiot, frankly, online because I said peak oil was nonsense, which it was, but people believed in it. And this is a problem: is we're all human. We tend to believe certain things and we start with that belief and go forward. And too many people either automatically support or oppose electric vehicles without saying, what is their value? When do they make sense? When are they solving something? And is this the best use of our financial resources? So I think what we're going to see in the long run is everything electric. But the long run could be quite a ways off. And I think in the next 10 years, we're going to see increased use of BEVs, but also I think a lot more hybrid, gas hybrid and plug-in hybrid vehicles. But, frankly, right now, the world is still burning 8 billion tons of coal a year, including in the US. And that's low-hanging fruit. Coming from a family that owns some coal resources, I cannot support the use of coal. It's a dirty, dangerous fuel. But that doesn't mean we should necessarily all shut down every major power plant thinking that solar power is going to replace it and that we don't need gasoline for cars. So that's kind of a skeptical overview of, my history of thinking. Thank you.
And that was a pretty candid evaluation, and I think every one of us would agree that when something gets evolved, it would have its own associated confusions and chaos. Some people get benefited, some people get into financial challenges, whether it is individual or organization. These are, I think, we have been seeing it over multiple decades, especially in the last couple of decades, because the intervention technology has brought into different segments. Now, can we move to Anil, please? Please, your thoughts.
Yeah, I would tend to be more optimistic about the overall disruption which is taking place. I would say that the disruption which is taking place for the sustainability is a welcome change and it's a welcome step. Now, the issue is that how do we mold it in favor of India and in favor of our country, so that it is in the best interest of our country as a whole, and we make the best use of the disruption which is taking place. Now, whenever it comes to the projections or the decision making, then very often it has happened that the best of the consulting companies or the think tanks have gone wrong with the projections, whether it was the adoption of the smartphones or the adoption of even the automobile vehicles way back more than a century back. And the learning curves are becoming steeper and steeper, and they are becoming almost now leading to a 90-degree curve. The EVs have a very important role in our overall ambition of the country and our commitments to the various COPs, whether 21, 26, and 27. And that is where probably we have to move forward with the commitments, what as a country, what we are planning to go and achieve in this direction. Now, taking into account this overall and very comprehensive picture, once again, I would say that it is that we have to take into consideration, we have to have all the stakeholders on board, and then we have to move forward in a comprehensive manner so that we make best use of our domestic market. And since it is understood there is no rocket science technology, we must make use of our market, and then we should try to reach to the pole position globally. That is what the industry should be doing. Our commitment in the country and from the leadership is for the clean, connected, and shared mobility, which is very much nowadays required, is the call of the day. And in order to achieve that, we have to take into account as to in what way how much, what should be the government policies, in what way the industry should move forward, and in what way we take into account the interest of the industry in the organized sector and the 40 million people, those who are associated in the unorganized sector of the internal combustion engines and all. We cannot ignore all these issues, considering that we have a democracy with a federal structure. The role of the state governments becomes very critical. The role of the central government becomes very critical, and the role of the industry is equally important to take it forward. As when we organized the Move Summit way back, maybe 5 years back or something, the commitment from the leadership was about the clean, connected, and seven C's of the mobility, of the transformative mobility, which were enunciated at that point of time. And with those seven C's, probably we are moving forward, and the country is taking it forward. So at the end of it, I would say that it's all very clear, and we have to move forward with a single-minded approach to take everybody along and achieve the targets or the things which are in the interest of the clean mobility, clean environment, and toward the sustainability in our overall objectives of the country as a whole.
Thank you, Anil, and I think that was also pretty well connected. The key point I picked from your expertise talk was more of how do you mold the revolutionary changes to our country's ambitions, practical situations, and scenarios. So that's a very important point. That goes well with any other country as well. Now, thank you so much, panelists. Now we would move on to some questions from the audience. We are getting overwhelming response from the audience. So what we have done is our team of experts at CPPR have put together a few questions, and I would leave it open to anyone for picking it. One question is from Darshika. Given the audacious goal we have taken at COP26, we need maximum synergy so that measures can be taken, or we are taking, to make sure that the electricity being supplied to the charging stations for the EVs are also from renewable energy. Very interesting question. I'm very sure the answer is going to be difficult, but I would throw it open to the panelists.
It is very much possible. The concept which is being talked is the energy consumption from well to the wheel. In case of our traditional sources of energy, but yes, of course, the charging should also come from the clean energy, and not only that, as it was earlier discussed, we should have the mining which is to be taken place. A lot of resources about the lithium have been coming up in the country, so we have to mine it, we have to process it, and we have to make it. The product has to be made for the making the anode, cathode, and the slurries. That we are rich in the anode manufacturing because we have a huge carbon base, but then other things where the lithium is to be used, we have to make the product. So all that energy which is being used, whether it is the mining or the processing of the minerals, it has also come from the green energy. So that is where I said that the disruption has to be in terms of not only the mobility, but it has to be in terms of the adoption of clean energy or the solar energy or the wind energy for our domestic consumption as well. And the country is moving very, very well in that direction.
Correct. So basically, we are talking about complete a 360-degree perspective of the complete cycle connected well within itself, right up to the electric mobility for the renewable sector. Now we have another question from Dr. Abhilash G. Ramesh. What are the challenges in terms of charging, battery swap, and charging station installation in India, and how far has India's quest for new charging technology positioned and progressed? A pretty generic question. Anybody wants to take that question? And Mike, you are also welcome to take the question. Is in an Indian context, but I would like to hear from an international context as well, how these things are happening in US or other parts of the world as well, based on your knowledge. Anyone is welcome to jump in.
I'll take a crack at it. We're seeing a lot of progress. It's mostly driven by government investment in the infrastructure. The fast chargers are pretty expensive. I think about $70,000 a piece. And they do require some additional infrastructure, but I think at the rate we're going, I don't think it puts a strain on most countries' electrical systems, except where you try to move too fast on a system that's not really already well stabilized, for example. Some parts of the world, that's certainly a problem. I mean, we've seen major blackouts, I know, in Pakistan recently because of lack of natural gas. But what I've seen is that most of the charging, it doesn't seem like this is a good private sector business, in the sense that people don't seem to be able to make money selling the chargers. It's usually a question of a building, an office building will put it in for employees, and it's just, part of their overall expenses. You see very few private charging stations, I think, around the world. Tesla is probably the leader in putting in their own charging stations. And I think that's because their brand name gives them a lot of profits per vehicle. They can afford it. Although longer term, it's going to be harder to see how that will go. The technology is still evolving some, although it's relatively mature, but in the next 5 to 10 years, it could be a lot better.
Great. Now I have a question, probably that could be the last one. We're pretty close to the time window. This is more to Talat, because it is something very related to what you spoke about in the urban mobility. Do you think that e-buses in India would be able to provide a long-term solution? There are cases in cities like Pune. I remember you touching some situations or examples and data from Pune, where the e-bus operators are unable to provide assured services due to challenges such as weather, especially when they have to put on the AC in the buses, which consumes more power, and difficulty in providing assured kilometers. The buses also have a longer term contract period of 7 to 10 years. So how is the business economics works if a private operator tries to enter that market? How is the ROI works? The last two segments I added, but this generic question is more about a case which he has projected from Pune, which I thought you may be the best person to answer. You did touch it.
So if I can, like we have been interviewing a few operators in India and policymakers in India related to the EV bus program in India. And I would like to say that we have not found any problems as such with the operators that we have found. And what is happening in India now is that I think we have been, most of the cities have gone with the CPP program, the cost plus, the CP contracts, the CPP contracts. So where the operator is like paying per routes and per operation of the per kilometer operation on the routes, and so it is working quite well. And generally, like when you're looking at EV bus, we are looking at a battery life of about 8 years. Generally, the battery would deteriorate. And I was talking to somebody in Indore, where they are operating a bus with, I think, a range of about 80 to 100. But with opportunity charging, what they said is they have been able to operate the bus pretty well. So I think it should not be a problem. And what one should remember is the systematic changes are also like we are still nascent into EV buses and EV bus operations. So as we move forward, I think innovations will come in, systems will adapt, and there might be some hiccups, But in the EV bus operations in India, there might be 1 or 2 odd cases where things might have been a problem. But I think the operations have been pretty smooth, and I don't see any problems in EV buses becoming a mainstay in India.
Okay, of course, but I would tend to agree with you and the person who raised the question. Like any other evolving technology, the risk and rewards are high. And you need to be pretty closely watching the innovations and the disruptions in that field, especially in the current decade, the way things are moving. Now, with this, I do have few more questions compiled by our experts, researchers in CVPR, but unfortunately we are running out of time. And from the very bottom of my heart and from the entire CPPR team, first of all, let me thank each and every one of you, sirs, Anil, Mike, and Talat. And we thank you all audience as well for taking time out, an hour and a half. It's not a small duration, taking time out. We have got a decent number of participants who have continued all throughout the journey. And I can see why everyone continued. The session was very, very energetic, charged, and informative. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a very good evening. And a good rest of the day, Mike.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Take
much.
care.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Good day.